I have a poem to begin this morning. The poem is called What She Said. It's from Billy Collins' collection of poems called Horoscopes for the Dead. What she said. When he told me he expected me to pay for dinner, I was like, give me a break. I was not the exact equivalent of give me a break. I was just similar to give me a break. As I said, I was like, give me a break. I would love to tell you how I was able to resemble give me a break without actually being identical to give me a break, but all I can say is that I sensed a similarity between me and give me a break. And that was close enough at that point in the evening. Even if it meant I would fall short of standing up from the table and screaming, give me a break, for God's sake, will you please give me a break? No. For that moment, with the rain streaking the restaurant windows and the waiter approaching, I felt the most I could be was like, to a certain degree, give me a break. And I'm like, I love that poem. I love Billy Collins' stuff, although that the use of the word like as it's used in that, I was like, give me a break, drives me nuts. However, I guess it makes the word like even more versatile and useful than it was before that way of using came into being. And Jesus likes the word like. He likes to talk about the kingdom, the realm of God. And so he says in the story today, according to Matthew, that the realm of God, the kingdom of heaven, is like this wealthy landowner who had a vineyard and he needed workers for his vineyard. So he went to hire them. And it becomes almost like a full-time job for him that one day, because he goes out about 7 and hires some, and he goes out again at 9, and he goes out at noon, and he goes out at 3, and he goes out at 5, repeatedly going to the marketplace where the day laborers, the people looking for work, hoping to snag a job for the day, gather, and he hires them every time, repeatedly going there. More workers, more workers, more workers. At the end of the day, then, he instructs his overseer, his project manager, now I want you to pay everybody the same. Everybody gets, quote, the usual daily wage, as the NRSV terms it, which is a denarius, which is not very much. It's enough for one person to eat for a day. It's not enough to feed a family, and you're not going to get ahead, and you need to work the next day if you're going to eat. So it's sort of a dependency here. Pay everyone the same, no matter how long they worked, but take those who were hired at 5 o'clock at the end of the day and pay them first. And then the ones at 3 o'clock, and then back until the ones at 7 o'clock in the morning who've worked all day, pay them the same. Okay? You do that. Why would you do that? What's he up to? The workers that are hired, many of them are landless, poor people who used to own land. But because the farmland was not productive enough to provide for them and also to pay the taxes that Rome has levied on them, heavier and heavier taxes, they've had to forfeit their land. And so the people showing up, needing work, are working often on the land that they used to own, the land that used to be their family sustenance and their family security, and now it belongs to somebody else who has all kinds of land, who doesn't even live on the farm anymore. They're absent landlords, and they get paid a pittance for their labor, and there are more laborers than there is work to do. That's the situation. That's what's going on in Jesus' time in Palestine. He sees that all over the place. And it's those poor landless folks, or those people who are really up against it, on the verge of losing everything, that his message appeals to. Because he says what? The realm of God is at hand. It's right here. So repent, which means turn, reorient yourselves, not towards Rome, not towards getting your land back. Orient yourselves towards God and lean into this good news and begin to live it and let it bring you to life and see what happens. That's the good news. And it is good news for these people who have little or nothing, many of them nothing, because this gives them something to hold on to. And it tells them that poor and powerless and last in line as they are, they're not forgotten, and God comes to them in Jesus first. Where it gets them right now, that's another issue. Daily bread, trust God, yeah. Is that enough? Does that do it? And I wonder, reading the story, do you suppose there's any resentment among these day laborers over towards those people who now own the land that used to be theirs, the people that they now work for who really don't need it, people who continue to get richer off of their labor? Do you think there's some political heat in the air from all of this that is building, that Jesus' message is steeped in, that he himself is steeped in, and that in that atmosphere, that's where he lives and that's where his message is delivered? I think so. All of this affects what he says and who he says it to. So why in the world do you think Jesus would tell a story like this, where a rich man, one of the 1%, if you will, a rich man calls the agenda in the story all the way to the end, antagonizes the workers in the way and the amount that he pays them, and then picks a fight with the one who dares to speak up to him and says, "You, I don't want to hear any more from you. Take what's yours and hit the road, Jack. I will do what I please with what belongs to me." What does that man have that he can take? Virtually nothing. Wouldn't this be like salt in the wound for him? Why would Jesus tell a story like this? See, here again, I suspect that there's something going on in Matthew's community in that about towards the end of the first century, 80 to 85, right in there when Matthew writes, there's something going on that he needs Jesus to speak to. And so he takes a story of Jesus and he bends it just a little bit for his own needs. So we don't know what that was, what was going on, but let's suggest, just for the fun of it, something familiar, that in this community of Matthew, there are some longtime members, and then there are some new folks coming in, right? And they come in, as new people will come into a church, with energy and enthusiasm and ideas. And we have some things that we could do here to kind of brighten this place up, and we could bring new people in, and maybe we should take the pews out and put chairs in, and maybe we should get rid of this thing, and you know, I don't know, to put in an orchestra, or, there's all kinds of things we could do. And you know, we have that goat barbecue every fall. We think that a hog roast would be a much better idea. I've heard they're really popular, and they would bring a lot of people in. The new folks coming in are Gentiles. The longtime members, many of them are Jewish, and they don't get it. Because one, it's not kosher, literally. And two, who's in charge here anyway? Who's been around? We've been around a long time. We know what works here and what doesn't. We know how this show runs. So no, you're not going to tell us what to do. We will tell you what to do. We were glad you're here, but we're the ones who are in charge. We're the deciders in this community. Have you heard that sort of thing before? Have you felt that before? Have you encountered that anywhere before? Have you been part of that anywhere? Yeah, maybe so. So Matthew's story then pushes back against that and says, you know, it doesn't matter how long you've been in the vineyard. It really doesn't matter how many funeral lunches you've served or how many committees you've served on. It's about how graced you are and realize it, and how you understand that in the community of the beloved, in God's realm, we are all the same. And there is no difference, and there is no dividing up and conquering. So Would that be Jesus' focus in the story? Would he be concerned about new members coming in and how everybody's getting along and what committees are working together and what aren't? No. What would he be aimed at? What would he be concerned with? He says the realm of God, according to Matthew, is like this wealthy landowner who needs workers. Or the realm of God could be compared to this wealthy man who has money to throw around. How is it like him? I want to suggest something to you. I don't know if this is right or wrong. This is where I went this week, and you can just chuck it all if you want to. But there's a word in the text in Greek that, in the background reading, the word is oikodespote. Oikodespote. That's translated as landowner in the New Revised Standard Version. If you break it open, oiko is home or house. Despote, if you take the A off, what have you got? Despot. It's the house despot. It's the tyrant of the estate is what we're talking about here. So who would that be? When we hear the story of the wealthy landowner, we think that must be God. Is that who Jesus is talking about? Why would you hire people at different times and pay everyone the same as the landowner does, as the estate tyrant does? Is it because he's generous? Or is it perhaps because he wants to sow dissension in the ranks so that these workers who are dependent on this work, and there's more workers than there is work to go around, who beg for it, who claw for it, sow dissension amongst them so they will distrust each other even more, be envious of each other, and certainly they won't come together and organize and demand better wages and better working conditions. Could that be what's going on here? We are all equal in God's eyes. In the realm of God, we are all graced and loved endlessly and equally. And Jesus does come to seek the last and the lost and the left out first. But that seems to be, to me, the point where the likeness, the similarity ends. Unless God is a fearful, manipulative, controlling jerk. And I don't think that's the case. So is the story talking about God and us, or is it talking about the realm of God and the Roman Empire in Jesus' time? What does that say then to us in our own time? I'm reading a book by Pat Conroy. It's called My Losing Season. I love Conroy's writing. I've read a number of his novels, and when I saw this, I thought, well, I got to read this. One, because of Conroy, and two, because my losing season, well, I relate to that. I had multiple losing seasons. I could write a book about them myself if I could remember as much as he can. Anyway, I got the book, I started reading it, and I almost threw it away immediately because it was bringing up stuff for me from my own past that I didn't want to remember, and it was sort of troubling. I almost set it aside. But then, as Conroy talks about high school sports and college sports, and especially basketball, and then he introduces his father, it suddenly becomes like this, train wreck that you can't look away from. You just have to watch and watch and watch and watch. Pat Conroy's father is a colonel in the Marine Corps, career military, and so the family moves all over the country. They're moving every couple years, if not every year. So he's in different schools and different communities, and he's shy, and it's painfully hard for him. But that's not the only pain, because his father is also a brutal, vindictive, cruel, violent human being. And as I read the story, the memoir, I lose track of how many times Pat's father, Pat is the oldest of 7, how many times his father, out of the blue, backhands him across the face so hard that he draws blood. How many times he beats him into submission until he's curled up on the floor, just waiting for it to be over. Or how many times Pat realizes he's going to get a beating and he takes off and goes and hides, knowing that when he comes back, it's just going to be worse. Pat was an athlete, but not as good an athlete as his father was. So there was this tension between them. And as an athlete, his father could have taught him and nurtured him and encouraged him to become better at the things that he wanted to do, and he would have been very helpful, but he couldn't do that somehow. Instead, he demeaned his son and ridiculed him and called him names and laughed at him. He said, "You're a loser. You're a loser. You're not going anywhere, and no college will want you to play there." He said it again and again and again. Well, after high school, Pat's father enrolled him at the Citadel, which is a military college in Charleston, South Carolina. They were just moving from South Carolina to Omaha, and so Pat is virtually left behind in this military school. And at that time, it was known for the most extreme hazing of freshman plebes of any military school or any college in the country, and that was because General Mark Clark, who was in charge of the school at the time, wanted to make sure that if any graduate of the Citadel went to war and was captured by the enemy, he could undergo any sort of torture and not break. So the first month of school for a freshman at the Citadel was literally torture, psychological and physical. And Pat writes about that, how he would be surrounded by a group of upperclassmen who would be screaming at him, screaming commands at him and calling him names, and how he was supposed to do 50 push-ups, or he's supposed to run the stairs, or he's supposed to hold his rifle out at arm's length until he's told to put it down. And over again, he collapses. He falls down vomiting. He's so undone that he can't, from push-ups, that he can't even lift his arms. And all the while he's trying to respond to these contradicting commands and the screaming that's going on all around him. It is awful. It's horrendous. So at the end of the first 2 weeks at the Citadel, he calls home. He needs to talk to his family. He's the one freshman who showed up without parents there. They didn't accompany him. He's the only one. He says, "I heard the operator say, 'Collect call from a Mr. Pat Conroy. Will you accept the charges?' I exploded with rage when my mother said, 'No, sorry, operator, we don't know any Pat Conroy.' Slamming the phone down, I immediately made another collect call, and when the operator spoke, I said, 'Accept the damn phone call, Mom.' With great reluctance, she did. 'Don't make this a habit, young man. You know this family isn't made of money. How's your first couple of weeks in college going? Are you having a ball?' I began weeping and couldn't stop. I suffered a mild breakdown of spirit and character as I lost a grip on all the words I'd planned to say to my mother. For 30 seconds, I sobbed until I could gain control. 'Mom, you sent me to a torture chamber,' I gasped out finally. 'Well, it'll be good for you. It'll make a man out of you.' 'It'll make a man like Dad out of me,' I snapped back. 'Well, just how bad is it?' Mom asked. 'Give me an example.' 'It's worse than Dad. That's how bad it is. I'd much rather be living with Dad than going to this school,' and he hated his father. After a long pause, my mother said, 'Oh my God.' Then my father took the phone, and I heard his despised, mocking voice. 'It sounds like my little baby boy's having some boo-hoo time with Mommy. If baby boy wants to do some whining, he can talk to Daddy Pooh.' 'I don't like the Citadel, Dad,' I said, controlling the quiver in my voice. 'I'm thinking about coming home.' I heard my father's laughter, then the hardening of his voice as he asked, 'Where's home, son?' you no longer have a home. He hung up before I could talk to my brothers or sisters. It was a harrowing experience, just the first couple weeks there. But it wasn't all horrible, thankfully. He had an English class with a professor, a colonel, John Doyle. And Doyle brought a humanity to the Citadel that Conroy desperately needed. In the first class session, he asked them to sit and write down a list of all the novels that they had read in high school. Conroy listed 40 novels that he had read because he was a voracious reader. Later, they're given the assignment to write an essay on a subject of importance to them right now, whatever it is. And they're to take their time and write it well because it's about the writing, not necessarily about the subject. So Pat sits down and writes this sort of scathing review of this first 2 weeks in this hellish place called the Citadel. And he describes the physical and emotional torture, and he tells of being hauled out in the middle of the night with other freshmen in their underwear, taken out to a swamp and made to stand there at attention while the mosquitoes and gnats and other bugs fed on them, and they weren't allowed to move. And the other things that they did, and how many young men left the first day and the second day as their ranks were thinning day by day. And he closes by wondering on paper how anyone seemingly as humane as Professor Doyle could participate in such an inhuman enterprise as the Citadel. And he hands it in. And he figures this is the end of him. He will be booted out of college and he'll go back home, and his father will have thought up some new tortures for him. But the colonel gives him an A and says on the paper, you seem to be having some trouble adjusting to life here at the Citadel. Come to my office on Friday afternoon at 1400 hours. We'll talk. And so he does. And I need to read you that as well because it's just so well said. On Friday afternoon, I sat beside Colonel Doyle's desk as he studied the list of the novels I'd itemized for him at the beginning of his class. You're widely read, Mr. Conroy, he said. My mother's read everything I said. She passed that on to my sister and me. You listed more novels than all the rest of your class. Are you unhappy here? I hate this place, I said. This essay you wrote, you were testing me, weren't you, Mr. Conroy? I'm not sure what you mean, sir. You knew I could have thrown you out of college if I'd turned this paper over to the commandant, Colonel Doyle said. Yes, sir. I think I knew that. I gave you an A instead, he said. I hope I passed your test. With flying colors, I said. I'm sorry you're having such a difficult time at the Citadel, he said. But I'd like you to know the young men who graduate from this college are the finest men I have ever met. A Citadel man is quite the work of art. Your time will be well spent here. If I stay that long, sir. You'll stay, he said. How do you know, sir? Your essay, Colonel Doyle said. The plebe system can't touch the spirit of that boy. The system can't touch the spirit of that boy. The system can't touch the spirit that is you, not the real you. There is eternity in you. There is God in you. There is the Spirit of God deep within you, and nothing can get at that. That is untouchable. That is forever. And when Pat begins to realize that, he begins to lose some of his fear of losing, which is ironic. My losing season becomes about losing in a way and learning how to do that. His father will never get there. He is the house tyrant who's so afraid that his son or somebody else will get it together and surpass him that he has to do everything he can to undercut and knock that person down and take that person apart and demean him. He's like the man in Jesus' story, the home tyrant or despot. And there are lots like him. They're winners, or they try to be first place in this system. But how does it go again at the end? And the last will be first, and the first will be last. After all, whose world, whose kingdom, whose life are we in and about even now and always? Amen.